Hi, I'm Stephanie Strange. Want to hear something scary?
Eladia was a God-fearing young woman from a strict Catholic family. She was to be wed to Salvador Cruz. Salvador had a reckless past with a penchant for tequila and the ladies. But now he went to church and had become the honest and caring man Eladia had prayed for. But old habits die hard. The night before the wedding, Salvador decided to visit his ex-girlfriend, Juana. While their relationship had been volatile and not good for either of them, the desire had not diminished. Juana plied him with his favorite tequila, and Salvador chose to momentarily forget Eladia. Salvador, selfish fool that he was, thought of this as closure, and he'd still enjoy his wedding in the morning. The next day, the bells rang out, but as the church doors opened, Eladia stood at the entrance, her father by her side, but the groom was nowhere to be found. Eladia looked around frantically, asking for Salvador. Then the whispers started, for everyone else knew exactly where he was. Humiliated, embarrassed for being lied to and cheated on, and for not honoring the sanctity of the church, Eladia wasn't thinking clearly. She ran up the stairs toward the bell tower as fast as she could. At the highest point of the church, she looked up to the heavens and said, "Forgive me, Father, for what I'm about to do." She closed her eyes and leapt to the ground, her neck snapping instantly. The wedding attendant stared in disbelief. The coroner came to remove the body, and the priest tried to calm the parishioners. 2 hours after the wedding, a taxi sped up to the church. Salvador stumbled out, reeking of booze. He straightened his tie and slicked back his hair, trying to cover his sins. When he saw the coroner loading the body bag into the van, Salvador knew. The crowd turned on him, chasing him out of town, and he wasn't seen again for months. Until one day, Salvador started showing up at church again. Sober and looking to repent, the community forgave him. He even began volunteering at the church, staying to clean up after services. One evening, alone in the church, he saw a woman in white pass by. He turned to ask if she was okay, but she was gone. Just as he was about to lock up, he heard a noise by the stairs. Glancing over, he saw white fabric floating up the stairway. He followed. The white fabric continued up to the roof near the bell, but there was no one there. All he could see was a white wedding veil lying over the edge, about to blow off. He ran up to it, snatching the lacy material. As he turned to head back downstairs, there she stood, the ghost of Eladia. Her neck snapped to the side, but she had become something else. The betrayal and grief of being left at the altar had created a vengeful spirit, La Novia da Tola. Before he could speak, she flew over, lifting him a foot off the ground. Floating in midair, she whispered, "Forgive me, Father, for what I'm about to do." She threw him over the ledge. His body fell, just as Eladia's had, except he didn't die instantly. He lay there, face down, writhing in pain, his legs broken, his arms shattered. Screaming in anguish, he felt Eladia hovering above him. He begged for her forgiveness. Eladia stomped on him, shattering the bones from his legs to his ribs to his pelvis. She rolled him over, looking him in the eye as he groaned. And with one final stomp, his face collapsed. The final breath left his body. By the time the townspeople found him, they mourned that Salvador's grief and regret had led him to commit suicide in the very place Eladia had. Because what should they believe otherwise? La Novia's legend led to statues and the Nicaraguan saying, left waiting like the bride from Tola. Hell hath no fury like a ghost scorned. It was Valentine's Day, which meant it was time for the Guatemala City Paper Company's annual employee party. Alejandro had missed last year's party, so when it got late, instead of heading home to his wife and family, he headed to the bar to get himself another drink. There, he saw the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She also seemed so familiar, but he couldn't remember how or why. "I'm Mariana," she said as her eyes glimmered. Alejandro couldn't believe his luck. He introduced himself, asking if she worked there. "No, a friend invited me," she said as she looked at Alejandro's wedding ring. "They said this was the place to be." She grabbed the drink out of his hand and began drinking it, never breaking eye contact. Alejandro felt his heart beating loudly. She made him feel like a single man again, and he realized that tonight could be the good time he wanted. "Let's get out of here," she murmured. As the two quietly left the party, Alejandro's phone buzzed with a message. He expected a scolding from his wife, Eliza, but instead found a picture of his 10-month-old daughter sleeping. She tuckered herself out, waiting for Papa to come home. Mariana chuckled. Filled with guilt, Alejandro looked up at the gorgeous woman and nodded. He sighed, knowing this would be another night cut short by his responsibilities. Unfazed, Mariana smiled and said, "It's up to you. I'm sure Eliza will take good care of her while we have fun." Alejandro did not remember giving his wife's name, but that wasn't important right now. Mariana was the kind of woman he deserved, he told himself. Just for one night at least. He led her to a deserted area along the riverbanks of the Rio Contreras, and Mariana suggested they go for a swim. She removed her clothes and waded into the water. Alejandro scrambled after her, reaching his hand out to caress her back. When she turned around, the beautiful woman melted away. Her face grew long and horse-like, and her eyes became a piercing red. Her hands were now bloody, razor-sharp hooves. Alejandro knew the legends. For centuries, the children of Central America have heard the haunting stories of La Ciguanaba, a supernatural shapeshifter that roams the streets every night looking for prey. She hunts and punishes unfaithful partners, but he had never believed. Through his terror, he sputtered, "It can't be. You can't be." Her voice grew coarse and growled. "Say my name." He shuddered, refusing at first to admit it to himself. Then he gave in. "La Ciguanaba," he cried. "You are the dreaded La Ciguanaba." The now grotesque nightmare spoke. "I have been waiting a long time to meet you, Alejandro." He stammered and begged, "Please, I have a wife and a daughter, a baby." "If they truly mattered to you, then you would not be here at my mercy," La Ciguanaba bellowed and then added, "But do not worry about them. I will care for what you have cast aside." Alejandro screamed as the shadow of La Ciguanaba fell upon him. That morning, Alejandro's wife, Eliza, was visited by La Ciguanaba, now back in the human form of Mariana. The supernatural shapeshifter hugged Eliza tightly as she caressed her hair and then kissed the baby on the forehead and said, "You were right, my sweet Eliza. He wasn't worthy of you. I'll be here as long as you need me."
Unusual didn't believe in anything supernatural. She was someone who needed to see things to believe them. To her, ghosts and jinns were excuses that parents used to stop their children from going out after dark. Unusual worked as a receptionist at the hospital. When her shift ended at 9 p.m., she would be wired from the busy day and go out till dawn to party, stumbling home only after the sun had risen. She knew it was dangerous, burning the candle at both ends, but working in a hospital, she also knew you only live once. One night after her shift, a colleague suggested that they try a new bar that had just opened. It was further out of town, but Anusha immediately agreed. They took 2 separate cars, of course one Anusha drove. The hours went by as they were having fun, and it was soon 2 a.m. and time to call it a night. The cars took the same route back until they got to the Mohakali overbridge, the first ever flyover built in Bangladesh, where they parted ways back to their different homes. The road was deserted, not a soul in sight. Anusha didn't know if it was just because she was exhausted, but she felt the bridge had an eerie feeling to it. The wind whistling as they sped along. They were around the middle of the bridge when Anusha spotted something that caused her to panic. A woman in white running straight towards them. The passengers in Anusha's car shrieked in horror as the woman headed right for them, making no sign of stopping even after seeing the car. They had no way of stopping in time. Anusha flinched as the woman just stood there, waiting for Anusha's car to hit her. Anusha instinctively wanted to swerve to the side, and there was still time. It would be the rational thing to do to avoid an accident, but a voice in the back of her head urged her not to. She looked around and saw that swerving left or right would result in a collision with the railings, or even worse, crash through them and down onto the road underneath. So she did as her brain instructed and drove on, not caring about the consequences, not caring about anything but saving her life and those of her passengers. She drove straight into the woman, who did not even wince as the vehicle hit her. It was as though she was made out of thin air, and the car simply passed through her. Anusha looked into the rearview mirror in disbelief, only to see the woman still standing where she had been. But she turned around and saw her face was staring at them, yet there was no blood in sight. Then she disappeared, a collective hallucination, and the remainder of their journey home was normal. The next day, Anusha was recounting her story at the hospital, telling a colleague about a woman on the bridge. In the middle of her story, she noticed a patient staring wide-eyed at her. He was a middle-aged man with a broken leg and arm, and his face was cut open and badly bruised. He stared at her with an expression of awe. Anusha couldn't help but be a little creeped out. When she asked the man if he needed something, he asked her anxiously, "You really encountered her too? You got away?" "What do you mean, me too?" Anusha asked hesitantly. "The woman in white," he said. Blood began to pulse through Anusha's body. She never said anything about the woman wearing white. Had this patient seen the same thing? He then took a long breath. "There's a legend about the place," he murmured. "Many people see her. She's a vengeful spirit. Probably rightfully so. She met her end on the bridge where she was killed by a drunk driver. She only appears to people when they have been drinking. Now you know the people who swerve all over the road usually aren't thinking straight. They crash into the railing, sometimes flying over the ledge to their deaths. You should consider yourself lucky." The reality of what happened finally hit Anusha. The logical part of the brain told her he was crazy. It was just a coincidence. It just couldn't have been real. She didn't believe in ghosts. "You have no proof," Anusha exclaimed as a bead of sweat trickled down the nape of her neck. "No proof?" he shouted back as he gestured to his broken bones and torn up face. "I'm living proof. I swerved to miss her, almost damn near died." Anusha looked at the patient in shock, realizing how fortunate she'd been. And with that, she never doubted the existence of the supernatural ever again. Thanks so much for listening. Like and share if this video gave you the chills. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for notifications. See you next time.